Starting a little bit early today. Thank you to the people that were already here. So we're done with chapter 9 and we're starting chapter 10. Chapter 10 is called, just a second, Kalatra Bhava. Which sort of means the seventh house, but it also means the conditions of Kalatra, the conditions of the wife, marriage, you could say marriage, but really it's about wife and children. So the interesting thing, which is pretty important to understand, is that babies come from women. Thank you. I will now ask for any questions after you digest that new information. Since babies come from kids, since babies come from women, then anything that affects the woman affects children. So anything that and vice versa. So anything that affects the wife will have an effect on children, and anything that affects children will have an effect on the wife. So the word kalatra, it means wife, but it also means sexuality, and it also means children, production of children. And so this almost, it's not exactly that anything that affects the mother affects the child, but it's close. So you can basically assume that anything which affects anything in astrology that pertains to children also has a side effect upon marriage, and especially mother or wife. And conversely, anything in astrology that symbolizes marriage, mother, wife, will also have a side effect on children. So that's one of the dynamics that you'll see come out in this 10th chapter, which talks about kalatra, spouse relationships and children. So, would you like to start? I'm going to look at the first yoga. As far as I can tell from skimming the 10th chapter, it's going to be like another chapter. Excuse me. It's going to be like another chapter of yogas. But these will all be yogas that pertain to kalatra. Make sense? Hi, Denise. Welcome. Comfort zone? I don't understand. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at what he's going to tell us. Shubhadipa yutekshte sutakalatra pe lagnata vitorapi tayos shubham tvitaratana siddhistayo. Shubhadipa yutekshte sutakalatra pe lagnata vidur apitayo shubham Tvitaratana siddhistayo. If auspicious lords conjoin or aspect the 5th and 7th house from the ascendant and also the moon, then both prosper. There is perfection of both offspring and romance. Okay, let's look at this on an actual chart because it's very technical. So first of all, Shubha Adipa means auspicious lord. What does that actually mean? There, I think, are three things. Shubhadipa, first of all, means the lord of Shubhabhava, which is the 9th house. So if the 9th lord is in the 5th house or in the 7th house, then it's good for marriage and children. It's good for the spouse and the child. If the 9th lord aspects the 5th house and or the 7th house, then it's good for the wife and the child. So that's one meaning for Shubha Adipa. The other meaning is Shubha Adipa means an auspicious lord. It doesn't just mean the lord of the house of auspiciousness, it means an auspicious lord. So that lord of its own house is auspicious for the house. So if the lord of the fifth house is in the fifth house, or if the lord of the seventh house is in the seventh house, or if the lord of the seventh house is aspecting the fifth, or fifth is aspecting the seventh, then it's auspicious for wife and children. Another meaning of Shubhadipa is a just like Jupiter or Venus, a natural benefic. And he says the fifth house from the moon, and also Vidho Api. Also, Api means like also the moon, Vidhu. So let's take a moment or two or three or five and look at this actually. Let's map it out as actual charts to really understand it and be able to remember what's going on. So let me switch over to that view. Here we have our lovely invisible floating chart. We'll just randomly take a Libra ascendant to illustrate. So I don't know if you can read this chart. This is a classical chart. So in a classical chart such as this, a classical style of drawing a chart, you can see there's four big areas in the middle, and they're colored pink. They don't have to be colored pink, but the big areas in the middle are the four central houses, Kendra, 1, 4, 7, and 10. So it goes looking at it, it's counterclockwise from the top, 1, 4, 7, 10. And then the top left, so for example, Libra is house 1, and then the next sign, Scorpio, which is the first green upside down triangle, and that's house 2. And then the blue triangle pointing right next to that one, which is Sagittarius, is house 3. Then you come to another big pink one. Capricorn is house 4. And then Aquarius, a green triangle pointing right, house 5. Okay, that's how the chart is read. So since for this yoga, we're interested in the 5th house and the 7th house. And since we're using a Libra ascendant as an example, we're going to be interested in Aquarius and Aries. If you can find those two squares, then you can see where the 5th and the 7th houses are. So what were our conditions? This condition is that the auspicious Lord should affect these houses. So, who is the auspicious Lord for Libra ascendant? Well, it's definitely the 9th Lord, right? So what house is the 9th house? By the way, it's very easy. When you use whole sign house system, everything is very rational and easy. The 9th house is always an air sign if the rising sign is an air sign. So it's just Gemini. It's very easy to memorize these things, actually. But if you don't have it memorized, you can just count it out. The first blue triangle that points left, down the bottom right of the chart, is the 9th house. And that's Gemini. And who owns Gemini? Mercury. So let's grab the symbol for Mercury. I would need to do that on the actual program. And put Mercury. Let's just start out with that. So this is a lovely chart. It's always nice to have the 9th Lord in the 9th house. But is this doing anything for wife and children? Indirectly, yes, because the 9th house is fortune in general. And wife and children, spouse and children are part of your fortune. So, fine. But is this anything related to this yoga that Mantreshwar has defined? No, not yet. What do we need to do with the 9th Lord? We need to put the 9th Lord someplace where it can affect the 5th and or the 7th house. So the simplest thing that any preschooler would do is just go like this. Grab the 9th Lord and put him here. Put him in the 5th house. Then you have this Kalatra Bhava Yoga. This positive yoga for children and marriage. Now you're looking at it and you're thinking it's in the fifth house. I can see how it would be good for children because the fifth house represents children. But I can't see why it would have something to do with marriage. That's because you forgot that babies come from marriage. That sex makes children. So anything in the fifth house is going to have to do with sex, and anything with sex is going to have to do with relationships, and anything with relationships has to do with marriage, whether or not it's called marriage or not, legally. So something which benefits the fifth house is definitely going to benefit the topics of the seventh house as well, and vice versa. On that point, some other things about the fifth house, which is intellect and something, is separate from the seventh. Okay? Makes sense so far? So far, it's very basic stuff, going slow. Good, Angela. So also, another preschool thing you can do is just simply take the ninth lord and put him in the seventh house. And then again, that indicates good fortune with reproduction, marriage, spouse, children. Now, are we sure that this is the greatest thing in the world? Not really, because we don't know the rest. But also, we haven't really explored the full depths of this, even just this yoga, because he also said Vidurapi. So also from the moon. So let's put the moon somewhere. Somebody suggest a sign. Type in a name of a zodiac sign, and we'll put the moon there. The lag also makes it so difficult to interact with you guys like this. Okay, Leo. Ankit says Leo. I'm going to take this moon and put this moon in Leo. That's a good, thank you for choosing Leo. So now we can differentiate let's just use the two same really basic examples that we used before. Putting Mercury, the ninth lord, here in the fifth house, or putting Mercury, the ninth lord, here in the seventh house. Which one is better? Which one is more indicative of a positive marriage, with positive and fruitful marriage? Fruitful meaning children. It is going to be this one, with Mercury in the fifth. If I ask you why, you should know that it has to do with the moon being in Leo, because I only started to talk about this after we put the moon in Leo, right? So why? What is it about the moon being in Leo which makes Mercury in Aquarius, fifth house, more beneficially indicative for children and marriage than Mercury in Aries, seventh house? It is the fact that Aquarius is now the seventh house from the moon. So now the ninth lord is not only in the fifth house, it's in the moon's seventh house. And this is something that you have to learn as probably, like I would say, it's not exactly a kindergarten technique, but it's like first grade. You really need to learn this early in your development with astrology to be able to start using astrology well later. Is that things accumulate, indications accumulate. If before learning that indications accumulate, you'll just have a scattered chart full of scattered things. But when you understand the concept of you want to see how much similar things accumulate, then all of a sudden you can start to make clear pictures of things. So this is a cumulative. The ninth lord in the fifth house is good for children and marriage, and the ninth lord in the seventh house is good for children and marriage, and this Mercury in Aquarius is both the ninth lord in the fifth house from the ascendant and the ninth lord in the seventh house from the moon. Any question? I personally have a question, but I won't reveal it yet. I'll see if you might have the same question. Yeah, that's it. Let me see if you have any question there. Do we care where Saturn is? Sure, of course. But let's not bring that in right now. Let's not bring that in right now because that's extra stuff that you do have to care about, but it's not, he hasn't written it into the yoga. Let's really explore what he has written into the yoga first before we look at stuff that's also things that you should also know about, but isn't the actual exact thing that we're trying to learn at the moment. Would the ninth's influence in the seventh lead to a more traditional marriage? No. But more essentially good marriage. Maybe a more traditional marriage. All right. Now, what if I did this? So here's my question, and I will phrase it to you in a way like this. What if I did this? Does this have anything to do with this yoga? The ninth Lord should be in contact with the fifth. Wait, have I done this correctly? 1 second. That's incorrect. What if I did this? The ninth Lord should be in connection with the seventh and the fifth houses. And I know people are going to look at this and think, whoa, it's Mangalik. Mangal dosh. Bad for marriage. Misdiagnosis. You misdiagnosed it. You're diagnosing a very weak yoga as having power over a more strong and specific yoga. Because what is happening here? This is very good. This is super good for marriage. Why? What's Mars? Well, you might say that's the second definition of Shubhadipa. An auspicious lord is the lord of its own house. So since Mars is the seventh lord in the seventh house, that's also auspicious. So now you've accumulated. You took the ninth lord, put it in the fifth house. You gave this yoga to the fifth house. And then you took the seventh lord and put it in the seventh house. You gave that yoga to the seventh house. Oh, and maybe that's for this other question of, do we care about the position of Saturn? Because Saturn is the fifth lord. That could be very strange. Actually, these are other yogas that we'll also see today. Something weird that can be strange here. But let's dance around that for a second and just put Saturn here. This would also be very auspicious. But I don't want to... that would confuse things for a second. I want to make this other point. I wasn't actually thinking that I'm putting the seventh lord in the seventh house. I was thinking something else. When I put Mars in Aries in the seventh house, I wasn't thinking, let's put the seventh lord in the seventh house and see if they notice. That wasn't my question in my mind. I had a different thing going on in my mind. Remember, I chose Venus first by mistake. What is it that I was thinking? Any guess? Oh, yes. Jacqueline, very good. Ninth Lord, ninth from Moon. So this is one thing. This planet, Mr. Mercury, is the ninth Lord from the Ascendant, but this planet, Mr. Mars, is the ninth Lord from the Moon. And this is another thing, which this is kindergarten, which you have to master this before you can be fluent with doing anything more poetic in astrology. You have to master these basic grammars. And again, this is just something that works with the whole sign house system, and it just doesn't work when you don't use a whole sign house system. But you have a lords from the ascendant. You can also have lords from the moon. You can have lords from the sun. You can have lords from anywhere. So in other words, since the moon is in Leo, then the sun is the moon's first lord. Mercury is the moon's second lord. So Mercury is the moon's 11th lord. So in this case, all right, so it's so hard to decide what to talk about first. So if you count away nine from the moon, you always can get 7 just by going opposite, and then Pisces. So 7 would be Aquarius, 8 Pisces, 9 is Aries. So Mars is the 9th lord from the moon. So if we still stick with the definition of Shubha Adipa being Shubha Bhava Adipa, with the 9th house lord, Mars is still the 9th house lord from the moon in the 7th house from the ascendant. You can cross-pollinate like that. As you look for things to accumulate, you look for that kind of the different ways that things can accumulate. You can get the 9th lord from the ascendant in the 5th house and the 9th lord from the moon in the 7th house. You've accumulated 2 of these positive things. The other thing that I wanted to say is, if we go back to this alone and we just consider Mercury again, we started out really very simple when we just said, look, this is nice. The 9th lord is in the 5th house. And then Ankit said, put the moon in Leo. And I said, that makes it even more good. Because now Mercury, the 9th lord, is in the ascendant's 5th house and the moon's 7th house. It's accumulated. It's double the yoga. Now that we start mentioning lords from the moon, you can also think about Mercury. Is Mercury still a good lord from the moon? It's a good lord from the ascendant, but is it also a good lord from the moon? In this case, it is. It's 2 and 11. It's the lord of 2 and 11. So it hasn't become an inauspicious lord like lord of the 6th, 8th, or 12th. If it was, then that would diminish. Right? Like if we put the moon here, it would diminish the goodness of Mercury being in the 5th house, of the 9th lord Mercury being in the 5th house Aquarius. Because now Mercury is, oh no, I put it on the wrong side. If we put it here, now Mercury is the 12th and 3rd lords. Okay. So that's why we like something like this, and you can do all kinds of things. You can also put Saturn here, right? Now it's the 5th lord in the 5th house, and it's also the moon's 7th lord in the moon's 7th house. So this is, now we've made this chart more and more and more indicative of very good destiny with the spouse, the child production, sexuality, reproduction, and child rearing, parenting. Any questions? And it also includes benefic planets. So then if you just put benefics like this, and it's so easy to misread this, because Mars and Saturn are malefics. But so therefore that diminishes it slightly diminishes it. But it's easy to misread it and just see it first like, oh, the person's Manglik. I don't want to marry this person. Or, oh, they have Saturn in the 5th house. Oh, they're calculating. You put Jupiter, put more benefics, stack up more benefics in there, more Shubhadipas. Or you can deal with the 5th. You can, if you want to separate them. Look, that's even better. Why is this even better? Because now the Jupiter is in its own sign, by itself, in the moon's 5th house, as the moon's 5th lord. All right? So, any questions about that? I just want to review his statement so that you see what we were talking about. The statement was this: Shubhadipa yuktekshite sutakalatra bhe lagnata vidhurapi tayo shubham tutaratana siddhistayo. If auspicious lords conjoin or aspect the 5th and 7th house, from the ascendant and also the moon, then both prosper. There's perfection of both offspring and romance. Is it clear? What if the moon was in Virgo? Then this whole thing would all of a sudden lose a lot of the duplicating would now be lost. So now the moon has nobody. Oh, I wanted to show you one other thing also. Now the moon has nobody in its 5th and 7th. So we just cut out like maybe 40% of the power or of the auspiciousness indicated to marriage by moving the moon from Leo to Virgo. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. When anybody says Yutekshana, there's 2 more things I have to show you actually. When anybody says Yutekshana, which means conjoining or aspecting a bhava, a house, there's another way to the house is not just the sign. So for example, the 5th house from Libra is not just Aquarius, but it's also Saturn, because Saturn is now the 5th Lord ruler. So doing something, I mean, let's do it. Let's do this. Doing something like this is also what Mantreshwar is talking about. Because here we've taken the 9th Lord and combined them with the 5th Lord. So therefore the 9th Lord is influencing the 5th house. And aspecting the 7th, right? Maybe. So that one thing I wanted to show you was that it's not just about putting the 9th Lord in contact with the sign of the house, but also the Lord of the house. And the next thing I want to show you is, don't forget not to be illiterate about aspects. Most people are very illiterate about how aspects work. Don't be illiterate. That aspects are degree specific. And certain aspects are very sensitive to degrees, like the 7th house aspect is very sensitive to whether you are closer to the 6th or closer to the 8th. The closer that it is to a 6th house aspect, very rapidly becomes less powerful. The closer it is to an 8th house aspect, it doesn't really lose its strength much, because an 8th house aspect is 3/4 full, 75%, whereas a 6th house aspect is 0. So halfway to 0 is 50. Halfway to 75 is still 82. So don't be illiterate either. If Mercury is at like 25 degrees in Libra, it is actually barely aspecting the 7th house. So just remember that too. Because the aspectual point in all the houses will be the same as the degree of the ascendant. That's the cusp. The cusp is the aspectual point, the aspected point, aspectable point. Aspectable. So if the ascendant is 5 degrees, then the target point in any house is 5 degrees. All right? So what is impressive is this is just one out of like probably 200 yogas that Mantreshwar is going to share in this book, maybe more. But there are at least like a dozen ways that you can achieve the yoga. So it really pays to sit down, to not rush through a reading of a book such as this, but to sit down and map it out and look at it and think about what it actually looks like. Because otherwise, if you just rush past, If the ninth lord, if the auspicious lord, if the ninth lord affects the fifth or the seventh house, you just think, oh, if the ninth lord is here or here, boss, I'm done. This is pretty simple yoga. Oh, I don't have it. Oh, my so-and-so doesn't have it. Okay. Okay. Let's see what else he's got. So I believe that we've explored that yoga sufficiently. Let's see what he says next in the second half of 1. Sitadvyaya sukhashtagai karagagaira san maddige site pyata shubhe tarekshita yute cha jayavada. Jayavada is not a good thing. Jayavada means it harms the wife. So now he explained the positive yoga first. And this positive yoga is pretty obtainable in various ways. So it might seem like it's unfair. He's just going to describe one positive yoga and then he's going to give 3 negative yogas. But that positive yoga, there's many, many different ways to attain it, as we just explored. Whereas the negative yogas that tend to be more specific. So what he said, Sitat, from Venus. Sitat Vyaya Sukha Ashta. The 12th, 4th, or 8th from Venus. Kara Kagai, a hard planet, a malefic planet, a toughy planet. Or Maddige, or if Venus has gone between those tough planets, then Site Pyata Shubhe Tarekshita Yute. If you don't have, if you're and also lacking any help, then the wife is harmed or lost or destroyed. Loss of the wife occurs if harsh planets are in the 12th, 4th, or 8th from Venus, or if Venus is between harsh planets without aspect or conjunction of auspicious planets. So he previously identified 5th house and 7th house as really important for kalatra, meaning the prosperity of marriage, or the fruition of marriage. Now he's saying, here's the next point, Venus. Venus is very important for this. 5th house, 7th house, Venus. Now he says, if Venus is in problems, then the wife has problems. If Venus is prospering, by opposite, just taking the opposite principle, if Venus is prospering, then the wife prospers. So what would this actually look like? Let's just look at the first thing. If you have malefics in the 12th, 4th, or 8th, and he doesn't say Lord, right? So it narrows it down. He just says Karakagai, which means naturally tough planets like Mars or Saturn, or let's also say the Sun. So let's look at that on a chart. There's so many applications, I forget which one I'm supposed to switch to. So let's take Venus. Somebody tell me what sign to put Venus in. Anyone? Where should I put Venus? Capricorn. Okay, I'll put Venus in Capricorn. Samurai says Venus's wife can be applied for a husband for a female chart. This isn't really a gender neutral chapter because we're talking about kalatra. Kalatra doesn't mean husband. Kalatra means the woman who makes a baby. And that's why we're talking. I mean, of course, the man also does something in childbirth. But it's really about wife. And then if you think, oh, that sucks, I'm a woman, what do I care? I'm not going to get married to a woman probably. Well, just the next chapter is going to be Sri Jataka. So he's taking chapter 10 and he's looking at marriage in terms of how would a wife be and how would a wife produce children well. So it's kind of like, I mean, it's not that it's not important to females. It's probably even more important to females. But it's not from the perspective of how is my relationship with my husband. It's how is the wife doing in the marriage, which indirectly also means how is your relationship to your husband, if you are the wife. And then the next chapter 11 will be, this is astrology, which is specific from a female point of view. So just hang on for that. Vic's birth chart report calculates, I forgot how many hundred, but it's like 200 or 300 yogas. All right, so Kit asked for Capricorn first, so we'll put Venus there. Okay. So now he said you take a Kagai. Kagai means sky mover. So it means a planet, right? Let's take a Karakaga. Oops. This is a not Somya Kaga. This is a Karakaga. Okay. These down here on the white strip are the Karakagai, the harsh planets. And he says you don't want to have them in the 12th, 8th, or 4th from Venus. From Venus. So it doesn't mean you don't want to have Saturn here in the 12th house. It means you don't want to have Saturn in Venus's 12th house, which is here. The sign before Venus's sign is the 12th sign from it. So if Venus is in Capricorn, then you don't want to have Saturn in Sagittarius. Or Mars or the Sun. If you do, then Venus is getting not blessed, not bountified. Bountified. The benefic planets, the soft planets, will bountify. And the hard planets will test and trial and muscleize. Build muscle. So that's not wifey, and that's not childy, and that's not childbirthy. Childbirthy needs fleshiness and softness and ampleness and softness. So we don't want to put malefics here in these important positions relative to Venus. This is the 4th position from Venus. And this is the 8th position from Venus. Interesting, though. The malefics. 2 of the malefics are in their own signs there. So look, I mean, how would you really interpret this? It's unlikely that this person suffers very much because they have the 11th Lord in the 11th house. And Venus in the 4th house is the 1st Lord. And it's unlikely that they suffer that much with marriage because they have the 7th Lord in the 7th house. Yet they really piled up an accumulation of malefic planets in 4, 8, and 12 from Venus. So you would interpret this as something like you are marrying somebody that's not fertile, or marrying somebody you have a good relationship with the person, but the aspect of sexuality and reproduction isn't the prosperous part of the relationship. Okay. Let me see, did we catch that all? He said, well, also the wife, diminishing the wife, harming the wife occurs if harsh planets are in 12, 4, 8 from Venus. Or if Venus is between harsh planets without aspect or conjunction of auspicious planets. So if you do this, these guys now are the auspicious ones or the soft ones, right? The other ones. If you did this, you would solve a lot of the problem. Especially if you line it up correctly with the degrees. Don't be illiterate with the aspects. because then you have a exalted Jupiter influencing Venus, protecting. So this is what I'm saying. This is the first grade technique in astrology, is you're looking for accumulations of similar things. So look at, like, put it on a graph in your mind, put it on a bar graph. Bad things for spouse, to be affected by malefics, especially in these sensitive positions, 8, 12, and 4. 8, 12, and 4 are the water signs, the watery areas. So to have malefics in the watery kapha areas is not going to be good for childbirth from Venus. And look, we piled up, we got the bar graph up 1 by having Saturn in Sagittarius, Venus is 12th. We piled up another bar on top of that graph by having Mars in Aries, Venus is 4th. And then we put a third bar, and actually if you make it as a percentage of all the possible things, that makes it 100%, right? 3 out of 3. So that bar of negatives is high. But then you have another bar next to it, which is positive effects on Venus. Is it affected by a benefic? Yes, it's affected by it. So knock down that negative bar 1, or pump up that positive bar 1. However you want to visualize it in your thought process. The positive bar pumps up 1 is going to bring down the impact of the negative bar a bit. And the fact that Jupiter is exalted, maybe make it a little bit higher, give it another half a space or something. And then if you could have another planet do something similar, like this would be real nice. Then add more to the positive side of the bar. And then you may also likely have something like this. So here's a very mixed bag. You're having both of the bars high. Venus has a lot of problems, and in terms of childbirth, and Venus has a lot of help in terms of childbirth. So how will you interpret it? You don't just erase the whole thing and say, well, it all equals 0. You say there's a lot of problems which are rescued and saved and amended and fixed. So in the end, there's likely success with some challenges and troubles along the way. It's not an effortless, easy success, but it's a success assisted by, because of assistance, there's success in childbirth and sexuality. Okay? So that's the second technique that we learned today. Any questions? Thank you, Red. How about Rahu? I would not put Rahu into my education about this, but I would count Rahu or Ketu as a pregnancy negative indicator, because they're unsteady and they're drying. Both of the planets are drying. They symbolize dry things or hot things. But he didn't mention anything about Rahu, and that's because Rahu and Ketu weren't treated. They are not planets, so they aren't really as constantly a part of your thinking when you do classical astrology. Sorry. Will retrograde planets be considered here too? Yes, Jacqueline, you got it right. Will retrograde planets be considered here too? He doesn't say anything about retrograde planets. You just know, it's another thing that you also know about astrology, is that retrograde planets are bright. And so they tend to be able to overcome problems. Let's see what else we got. So now we switch back to the text. And we see what comes next in the text. What about gay people like me? Well, you probably won't. I mean, you could adopt kids, right? But you're probably not going to be doing childbirth. So this is not for you. And you would probably find that in your chart, that if you're a gay woman, you would probably find that you're not going to be having childbirth. And that would be indicated in your chart. If you're a gay man, this whole chapter isn't really about you. Right? Does that make sense, Paul? I think, right? A very simple, kind of common sense. All right, let's see what else we got. Now we're on the second text. Dare she sutage pranashta vanito. You can probably find some way that it relates to you, but it's not going to be the literal impact, of course, because there's not the biology going on. Okay. Dare she sutage pranashta vanito putro tavadhishvaro. Juneva Nidaneshwaro pikurute patni vinasham dhruvam. It's patni vinash. Which is the same meaning as dara vada. It's very bad for the patni. It's going to harm the wife. So the next thing he's going to talk about is another principle that would harm the wife, meaning harm the fertility and reproduction of the wife, because the topic is kalatra. He says the seventh lord in the fifth house brings childlessness. So this is a weird exception to the first yoga that he said. The first yoga that he said was, if auspicious lords conjoin an aspect the fifth and seventh houses, then it's great. You get perfection of both offspring and romance. Sexuality. You get sexuality and childbirth, birthing and rearing, parenting, perfect. But if you do that, like if you take an example of that, and we said the lords of the houses are auspicious for the houses, right? Shub Adipa doesn't just mean the lord of the ninth, but it also means, in this case, the lord of the fifth and the seventh. So this, for example, is very good for fertility of a woman. You know what? The way that if you're a woman, this means your fertility. If you're a man, this means the fertility of your mate, of your spouse. And let's see what he says in the next chapter, because he's going to clarify issues like that in the next chapter about gender of the native. But anyway, you might think, well, this would be great. And yes, it will. Because the fifth lord is auspicious, not in general, but auspicious for the fifth house. And just like the eighth lord is auspicious for the eighth house, the 12th lord is auspicious for the 12th house, not in general. Because every lord is auspicious for its own house. So this is fine, but this, however, is not fine. It's no good. It's no like it. It's no like it. Although the Parivartana Yoga might do something else. I would want to see what Mantreshwar says about this Parivartana Yoga. I believe that he kind of likes this, but he might make an exception for 5-7. But aside from the fact of the Parivartana, the fifth lord in the seventh and the seventh lord in the fifth, they're not Shubhadipa. And in fact, he says for some reason, and I'll explain the reason actually, it's no good. I don't like it. But Nivinash. Oh my God! I forgot to show you the screen the whole time. So this is what I was talking about. So sorry, I need to rewind the tape. I was saying this is good. Fifth lord in the seventh. Fifth lord in the fifth, seventh lord in the seventh. That's good. But this is no good. Seventh lord in the fifth lord in the seventh. So if we go back to where I was before, stop. Dareshe Sutage means if Dareshe, seventh lord, goes Sutage into the house of children. The lord of the beloved goes into the house of children, Pranashta Vanita. It's not good. Aputrata. And you don't have kids. The seventh lord in the fifth house brings childlessness, usually by spoiling marital relationships. Pranashta Vanita. So again, the two issues are related. But now why? And also he said usually, or actually in this part he just said by spoiling the relationships, but in the next part he says api, which means it's particularly going to destroy the relationship. So the seventh house, like the fifth house isn't just about children, it's also about intellect. So the seventh house isn't just about marriage. All these houses have several things. The seventh house is based upon it being the sunset. Secondarily, it's opposite to the east, but primarily it's the west. So the primary meaning is that the seventh house is not marriage. The primary meaning of the seventh house is death and disappearance. Disappearance. The east is appearance and the west is disappearance. Duh. Sunrise, sunset. So the reason why the seventh house has to do with marriage or relationships is because the self disappears into the relationship. And that's one thing. And the other thing is it's opposite to the east. Some things derive their meanings from what they're related to. So opposite to the east means the thing that's opposite to the self. It means the partner, the other person. But so seventh lord, it doesn't just indicate marriage, it indicates death and it indicates disappearing of things. So if you put the seventh lord in the fifth house, you're putting an agent of disappearance into the house of children. So it's going to spoil the fertility and the person who produces the child. How else would you spoil fertility? So Dareshe, seventh lord, goes into the Sutage, house of children, Pranashta Vanita. That spoils, and Aputra, that spoils the childbirthing and the childbirther. And Dishwara, that means the lord of the fifth house, the lord of intellect, Dune va, going into the house of disappearance. The seventh, especially Nidhaneshwara, especially if the eighth lord is also involved, Kurite Patni Vinash, also makes Patni Vinash, also makes Pranashta Vanita, also harms the marriage, the wife. But it's slightly different. So the fifth lord, the seventh lord has the problem that it's associated with the sunset. The fifth lord doesn't. The fifth lord is an auspicious lord by itself. It's a trine lord. So why, if it goes to the seventh house? Well, now it's gone to Dunaga. So now you have the lord of children going away, going into a disappearing place, going into a place of disappearance. But he says for this yoga to really be serious, you should try to get the eighth lord involved, or not try. You should get the eighth lord involved in it too. If the eighth lord is also involved with the fifth lord in the seventh house, then it's certain. If it's just the fifth lord in the seventh house, then it's not so strong. If the eighth lord is also involved with the fifth lord being in the seventh house, so if it's aspecting, etc. All right, so let me show you. Who's the fifth lord for Libra ascendant? Saturn. Okay, we want to take Dishwara, the fifth lord, Dunage, and put it in the house of disappearance. So we do this. Now, that's particularly bad because this particular fifth lord is debilitated here, in this, using Libra as an example. So this in and of itself would be pretty bad. But in order to really make it, to pile up the accumulations as I'm talking about, the basic technique, accumulating similar indications, you want to see, it needs more help because the fifth lord tends to be good. So it needs more negative assistance to truly have a negative effect. So being debilitated kind of accomplishes that. But in a more generic sense for any fifth lord, We want to get this person involved, Venus, which is weird because by nature, by nature, Venus is fertility positive. But because she's the eighth lord, so that wouldn't be so bad. So you see, Libra has a problem here, but also a strength. So what I mean is, this fifth lord in the seventh house is particularly damaging for Libra, but the eighth lord affecting the fifth lord is undamaging because the eighth lord is Venus. All of this kind of stuff that sounds complicated is really simple once you get used to accumulating, and bar graphing the way you think, accumulating similar things. If the eighth lord is also a harsh planet, then it would be accumulating more powerfully bad. All right, so anyway, that means if you do something like this or this, then the eighth lord gets into the seventh house with the fifth lord, and that he says especially affects the spouse, and then secondarily affects the children, whereas the vice versa, which was to do this, put the seventh lord in the fifth house, which didn't really need more help in order to be significant. That affects the children first and the wife secondarily. All right. You probably have a question. You guys want to hear more about Rahu? Can't Rahu also be considered fifth? No, it can't. I don't know what classical text you're using, but no. Show me if you got a classical text that says Rahu owns Aquarius, then show me. If it's somebody else, thank you, Eddie. If it's somebody else, then I don't want to hear it. I don't care. I mean, I can say anything I want. You can say anything you want, and so can somebody else. But if it's like a text which is respected over the centuries, then I want to hear it. But if yes, how would Parivartana of Rahu in the seventh and Mars in the fifth play out? I mentioned that. That's another addition. That Mantreshwar likes Parivartana's. I don't think we've gone to his Parivartana channel yet. Or maybe we did. Maybe it was in chapter 6 with all the yogas. We may have gone over it fast. Yeah, I think we did. He likes Parivartanas between Kendra and Kona because it's actually even makes a Raja Yoga. So you could say this is not good. Oh, let me see what's showing on the screen. So you could say this is not good, and you can to have the seventh lord in the fifth house, and this is not good to have the fifth lord in the seventh house. But maybe this one is canceling out, the way the bar graphs are going. Okay, it's not good to have the fifth in the seventh, and it's not good to have the seventh in the fifth, but it's very good to have a Parivartana, especially between a Kendra and a Kona. So this is just what I'm telling you. Please hear it. That you have to learn these kindergarten and first grade techniques of how to think. The algebra of astrology. About how considering multiple factors at once is done. And you cannot arrive at black and white conclusions. After you leave this situation, as long as you're playing around in kindergarten with one planet at a time, like this, then you can have your black and white thing. This person has a spotless, perfect marriage, producing wonderful children, because the ninth lord is in the fifth house. Boss. That's great, and it works in your coloring book for first grade and kindergarten. But as soon as you grab any one of these other guys from the bottom and put them anywhere in here, that's all done. And it's time to grow up. And it's time to learn how to think with multiple things happening at the same time. And if you don't take this advice about how to organize the thoughts into columns and accumulate similar things on a column so that you can visualize what's more important than what, then you'll just be trying to paint paintings with coloring book level skills. I'm sorry to hear that, Jacqueline. Okay, going to next. We have like 2 more, I think. Seventh Lord in the 5th house brings childlessness, usually by spoiling marital relationships. 5th Lord and the 8th Lord, too, in the 7th house indicates ruin to the wife alone, primarily wife. And then what I have written here is what I explained. The second yoga in the second verse is on one line. Chinendao sutagevyastat anugai papaya adaratmaja. Adara Atmaja. You won't have a wife or a child if malefics are in 12, 1, and 7 while the waning moon is in the 5th. So you don't like this heavy duty astrology stuff from the old days where they actually make clear statements because it's scary. But remember, he's talking about one part of the algebra thing. This is what this effect does by itself. Like I said, when you're in kindergarten, you can make these black and white statements. But as soon as you stick somebody else on the page, you get out of the black and white statement. You have great children, or you have no children, your wife is dead. It doesn't go that black and white in real life. There's all kinds of gradations in between that you have to work with, but now we're dealing with the basic principle itself, so the statements are very black and white. There are no wife or children if malefics are in 12, 1, or 7 while the waning moon is the 5th. The other thing that you can kind of reassure yourself about is it's pretty complicated. Even to just get a black and white statement like, no, you don't got a wife or a kid, you have to do kind of a lot. Malefics in 12, 1, or 7 while the waning moon is in the 5th. So let's look at this, see what it actually looks like. So waning moon, what do you need to know to find a waning moon? Let's say if I put the moon here. Oops. What if I put the moon in the 1st house, Libra? How do I know if this is a waning moon or a waxing moon? Anybody know how you do it? What other planet do I need to know the position of in order to know if the moon is waning or waxing? Hi, Heidi. Thank you. Good. Everybody's saying the sun. So you people have made me very happy. You are getting some of the basic astronomy and mechanics. All right. I'm happy to see that. So where do we have to put it then? If I put the sun over here, this moon is full. Now let me see. How is this going to work? This is kind of complicated. If I put the sun here, then the moon is moving towards the sun, right? Remember, the moon moves faster than the sun. That's how to remember this. That's what I just had to remind myself of in my head. The moon moves faster than the sun, so the waxing or waningness depends on the moon relation to the sun. So, for example, this moon, it's moving away from the sun towards the middle. Once the moon gets here, it's full. While the moon is over here, it's half waxed. While over here, it's like quarter. Here, it's like quarter waxing. Okay? Now full. Now it starts to wane. Now it's empty. Now it starts to wax. I hope this comes through. I'm dragging the moon around. Yes, it came through. Thanks to lag, I can see. Thank you, lag. Okay, So we want to have a waning moon in the fifth house. So this is sensitive because moon in the fifth house can be very good for children if it's waxing. Because what does waning signify? Signifies weakness of mothering. And what does waxing moons signify? Strongness of mothering. Now, that means you want to get this moon closer to the sun. But if you put the moon closer to the sun on this side, then although the moon is not strong, it's getting stronger. So things are not going down, things are going up regarding the moon. So even though this moon is quite dark and maybe even invisible if they're close, it still has the benefit of being waxing, that its future is improving, it's getting brighter. Whereas once you get the moon on the other side of the sun, and then it's getting less. Now it's considered waning. So this right here would match one part of Mantreshwar's yoga for no kids, no wife. You see, it's very interesting. It doesn't have to do anything to the seventh house or Venus or whatever to affect the marriage, because children and marriage are inseparable, almost inseparable. So if you have something affecting children, you can use your head. It will affect the marriage. How would you get no children? Well, one way is you don't get married. That's one way. So what he's saying here is, this is not good. No wife. Adara patni. Adara putra. Atmaja. Adara atmaja. You won't have marriage or kids. But it's only one part. What was the other part? The other one was to have malefics in 1, 7, and 12? Yep, 1, 7, and 12. So malefics, who's malefic? Sun is malefic, Saturn is malefic, Mars is malefic. Malefic planets are very good for business. Malefic planets are very good for competition, sports, war, strength, leadership, etc. Malefic planets are not good for marriage, childbirthing, anything feminine. Malefic planets are masculine. So, although this moon is darker with the sun in Pisces, it's darker than a sun in Aries, and even though the sun in Aries is exalted, if you put the sun in Aries, you have a malefic in the 7th house. So it's complicated, isn't it? It's not black and white, because one of the things about the sun in Aries is good, but another thing about it is it's a malefic in the 7th. Good, yes, but not good for the softness or intimacy or blending, merging, being solventized, waterized, and blended together of relationships and marriage. Unification, not good for that. But that's only one, again, you put Saturn here and you have the same problem. This is a very complicated chart. It's exalted, but it's a malefic in the 1st. And it's probably in a mutual aspect with an arch enemy. And 12. And this is just 1, 12, 7. He doesn't say from anywhere, so he just means from the ascendant. Of course, this would be tremendously worse, wouldn't it? But that would be a waxing moon. So what you would deal with here is a very complicated marriage, but good children. You find that often, don't you? The children are the only saving grace of the marriage. The children is what holds the marriage together. The children, the husband disappears or the wife disappears, but the children remain. You find that sometimes. So this is kind of a chart that looks something like that. Especially if you do something good to the 4th. Like maybe do something like this. Yeah, so that you can get benefic aspect on something like this maybe. Okay, that is his fourth yoga that he's teaching us today. Any questions? Um, I don't know, Vishwa, you guys are really into Rahu. Just, can you please chill out on Rahu? This illusion, would a similar moon in the 11th house create the same effect since it can directly aspect the 5th? He didn't say so. So I don't think it's strong enough. See, you need, also, I think you need to sort out your focal points versus your influences. This is also like first or second grade kind of important things to iron out in how astrological logic works. There's a difference between a focal point and an influence. So he is assigning his focal point is a weak moon in the 5th house. That makes sense. Moon is child producing and the 5th house is child producing. If the moon is weak in the 5th house, it has a weak impact on it weakens the child production. That becomes the focal point. And then if this is also assisted by malefics in 1, 7, and 12, right? So if you take the moon in the 11th, then the focal point has kind of gone away. So yeah, the moon can influence the 5th house from the 11th house, but it's not anchoring an interpretation. Suraj is asking about moon and sun and kendras from each other. This is just a simple, very low-grade yoga, like a low-grade intensity basic yoga of the angle between the sun and the moon. It's just giving a very basic background effect. As I said, you have to start to think. I'm going to have to think about a million things at once. If you just think, I have this yoga, therefore this is my effect, then you're just not thinking well. You're going to have to look at all of the factors and put them all together to get a whole picture. And you don't want to do that because it's complicated and lazy. So you can go to an astrologer to have it done, but unfortunately 90% of them don't do it either. So why don't you take the effort to learn how to do it? Because it's rewarding. It's rewarding to teach your mind how to think. It's even more rewarding than whatever the specific thing is you're going to figure out from astrology. Is to just teach your mind how to think well. So why not do it? Okay, there's one more. Love regardless. Would a Rashi chart give a clue if birth time is unknown? No. What you want to do with the unknown birth time is use the moon's chart only. But also you have to walk on eggshells because you don't know half of the information you need to know. Okay, next up, the final yoga for today. To see. Interesting, very interesting. This one is very interesting. Stri samgad dhananashanam madagayo swadbha. Oh! Har Har Mahadev, you finally have Rahu mentioned. Stri samgad dhananashanam madagayo swarbhanu bhanvur vadet. Predict paying money for female company if Rahu and Sun occupy the 7th house. So the previous one was Adar Atmaja. You don't have a wife or a kid. But maybe at least you don't care. But this next one is you don't have a wife or a kid and you're jonesing for it. You wish you did. So you're just gonna, but you're such a type of person that you don't want a wife or a kid. You just want the pleasure of female company. So you'll just pay. Prostitute, or just pay in the sense of, I give you this, you give me that. And then goodbye. There's no actual intimate loving relationship. There's no actual sense of conceiving a child. That's what he means by Sri Sangad Dhananashana. And not just he, this is a very popular saying. It's a popular way of saying prostitution. Sri Sang, or pornography or whatever. Sri Sangad Dhana, or not even just like casual dating type of thing. I'll give you this, bartering kind of relationships. I do this for you, you do this for me. Let's go. Sri Sangha Dhananashanam. You spend money for Sri Sangha. So it's if Rahu and the Sun occupy the 7th house. What is happening here? You go way too masculine and way too exaggerated. So here's finally you get to hear about Rahu. Rahu is exaggerative. So let's look at it. This is an interesting example, but believe me, it would work for this chart because Libra is prone to polygamy in the first place. I mean, not maybe prone to it, but it supports it well because it's Venus's air sign, and air is very open. Right? Air contacts everything and everyone. So Venus's air sign is kind of has a potential for multiple relationships, multiple marriages, multiple sexual partners, etc. So even though with the Libra ascendant, you say, well, Sun in the 7th house is good because it's exalted. It's exalted. It's an exalted Sun. So it's exalted masculinity in the 7th house. I know people don't like it when I get clear about masculinity versus femininity, but masculinity is not about cooperation. Masculinity is about independence. Femininity is about cooperation. So masculine symbolisms in the 7th house screw up the 7th house. And if you exalt it, then they probably don't mind. They probably actually enjoy it or like it about themselves that they're Jay-Z, who somehow wound up with Beyonce or something. But, that their idea of Jay-Z, which if you know the song I'm talking about, I don't feel like even quoting it. But, He-Man Woman Haters Club from the Little Rascals, where it's like cool to be independent from women because you got the exalted. Or for a woman, it's harder to get this effect because you're biologically female. But you still get the effect. And you get the effect, but with a male with this chart, you'll really see the effect very vividly of just being so overly strong about the sexuality. So I don't even have Rahu's glyph here. Let's make it. I think it's and so if you do this, then you exaggerated the Sun in the 7th house. And also Rahu is instantaneous, and Rahu is instantaneous and heterodox. So it's not that prostitution is heterodox, actually it's quite orthodox. But 7th house as marriage, Rahu heterodox to the 7th house is relationships without marriage. So this Mantreshwar says this is a symbol for a man that's a womanizer. That's the term. If you're a woman with this chart, you're also pretty freewheeling. But I know people don't like when I do this or anybody does this make a difference between genders, but there are differences between genders, biological. Your body affects the way that your mind works. Just try it. Switch to a different body or get a memory from a past life, and you'll be shocked. So you get a pretty freewheeling, independent, modern type woman with this thing, but it's not like this woman goes to gigolos. It's not really the indication. But in a male's chart, here's a guy who's got a lot of saved data from Pornhub on his laptop. All right. So I thought that was kind of humorous yoga. Sri Sangha, and also just please understand that's what he means by Sri Sangha Dhananashana. You spend your money or you exhaust your money. You're buying Sri. You're buying the childbirther. You're buying the woman. I hope I had the screen correct. Yep. Okay, any last questions? Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Brian. Hypersexual porn addict. Poor guy. Don't know any of those people. Just remember, remember please, this is not exactly the most kindergarten level thing. It has 2 planets. Wow. Remember, there's 7, 8, or 9 planets that you should at least think once about before you jump to a conclusion about anybody. So maybe they have a really phenomenally something else, stable, moral stuff going on relative to the moon, etc. So you can get a complicated picture. Don't just write somebody off because there's one thing in their chart that you notice that you happen to know about when you're dabbling with astrology. But the only way to learn astrology gradually is to go bit by bit. Does a 7 to 5 8 connection in any house have a similar negative effect? This is a good question. Okay, let me address some of these questions. Could you comment on the difference in strength of a malefic aspect to the 5th and 7th house and an aspect of a malefic planet? Okay, I'll address that question. Vanali says, an itinerary for your live streams, it's always... Let's talk about it as if we were in New York City. Then it would be Mondays and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Suraj S.Y. is Libra in the ascendant just because I picked it. What do you want to do? How would it be any different? Children oriented. Okay. Taurus as the ascendant. Okay, what do you want to look at? How is it going to be any different? Nothing's going to be different except for the specific planets that you use. You won't get some of the dynamics. Like now, Saturn's not the 5th lord, so it doesn't get debilitated in the 7th house. But then Venus is not the 8th lord. So there's small specifics. But everything else is basically the same. This is good. This is not good. This is good. This is not good. This is good. This is good too. Etc. Same things. You just have the basic background. Maybe it's a little different. That it's harder because you do cumulative thinking. So if your rising sign is marriage and child positive, then you have to stack up more negative indicators in the chart to be able to make a negative effect. Whereas if your rising sign is maybe negative towards those things or undecided on those things, then you don't have to stack as many. Okay, another question. This is from Ankit. Does a 7th and 5th, 8th connection in any house have a similar negative effect. So this is what Ankit is asking. What we said was here, this is harmful to the wife and child because the 5th lord has disappeared by going to the sunset, and it's with the 8th lord which causes things to disappear. So the children disappear, and if the children disappear, it probably means the producer of the child has a problem. Okay, so now what Ankit is asking is, would it affect another house the other way? No, because the whole logic behind the yoga is going to the 7th house means disappearance, because you're going to the sunset. Other way around, we said that this was not good. 7th lord and the 5th, because the lord of disappearance went to the house of children. We didn't need the 8th lord connection with that, but of course if we have it, it's even more accumulates, more negative stuff. Would this also be a problem for the 4th house? Kind of. But this is more profound because 5 and 7 are connected, because children are connected to spouse, children are connected to marriage and intercourse. This is why 7th lord in houses doesn't really come up roses often. Sun Rahu in the 7th. Can we extrapolate that this combination in the 5th or 6th or 12th or 11th produces similar results? Well, yeah. What you can do, because we got some guy that we want to criticize who has Rahu and Sun together. Here, look, this is classic, right? This is classically a person who wants too much sex and is not willing to be patient about anything. But this is, use your head. That's the same basic. That's the same, right? Maybe, in fact, this person is more adulterous because it didn't directly impact the marriage, but it sure impacted the sexuality. Maybe this is pretty hedonistic too. So Rahu, whereas this, however, not so bad, because the sun kind of belongs in the 10th house, and an exaggerated sun in the 7th house, you might be a tiringly extroverted person that drains everybody else around you with your extroversion, but it's not necessarily hedonistic. Maybe. So what I wanted to say was, yeah, kind of, but again, you just think of stacking effects. This is what I'm talking about. It's cumulative stuff, stacking of effects. This is a lot of stacking has gone on here because you put it in the 5th. In this case, it's also in the 8th sign. And then also, you just didn't, maybe we do have to mention it. But this one, this configuration is pretty bad in terms of being lascivious and not having relationships but wanting the sex anyway. Why? Because it's in the 8th house and 7th from the moon. Okay. Topics: Monday is Phaladipika and Wednesday is Bhagavatam. Correct, MM. I think I kind of answered you. Like with the sun with Rahu in 10th house, it's not really affecting much relationship stuff, and now it's affecting career where it kind of belongs. Do we also consider children out of wedlock using these yogas? Yeah, you would get some of the bad ones. Can seventh lord in the seventh symbolize disappearance of the partner? Not really. No, because seventh lord is Lord's is always auspicious for his house. But you may find something else is going on that you weren't aware of in that particular chart. Seventh lord in the eighth house is kind of difficult. Seventh lord in the sixth house is difficult for peace or cooperation with the spouse. Yes. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed these. So we got a whole chapter full of these. There's quite a few. Let's see how many texts we got. We're going to be doing this for a while, looking at relationship yogas, especially as they impact marriage, wife, and children. And then after that, we'll be on chapter 11. We'll be looking at female-specific stuff. So these are all the yogas. Okay, so we got 15 texts. Probably at least 2 in each text. So probably like 30. So something like another 25-ish of stuff like this. Kalatra samstaya kalatra drishte. Kalatra nate. See all the kalatra. It's all about that topic. So I'll see you next week for more discussion about babies, making babies. Sounds good?